started with today's Back on Track session. So welcome, Iowa College Aid and ICANN are hosting a variety of events this week to help prepare students for their post-secondary adventures. And you can find the link to other sessions that will be taking place in the chat. So if you're interested at the end, go ahead and click on that link. But right now, we are excited to have, oh my gosh, Angela Lamb with the University of Iowa. And she will be speaking about post-secondary adventures. First, a couple housekeeping links. The meeting, as you've heard, is being recorded. This is a Zoom meeting, and participants have the ability to unmute themselves at any point in time and ask questions to the presenter. We do ask that you keep yourself muted unless speaking to avoid background noise. The session is recorded, and you can ask your school counselor for the recording link at the beginning of next week. And you could unmute to ask questions at a good stopping point with the presentation, or mute or type into the chat, and we can answer those questions as we go through at an appropriate time. So we'll begin our session. Welcome, Angela. Thank you for joining us, and I'll let you take it away.
Hey, wonderful. Well, I'm glad that folks are joining us today, and hopefully you will get something out of today's discussion. We're going to talk about keys to being successful in college. But first, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Angie Lamb, and I'm an assistant director in academic support and retention at the University of Iowa. And a lot of my job is helping students be successful in college. So this is definitely something that I'm really passionate about, and could talk about every single one of these topics that I'm going to cover today at length. So hopefully I will keep it in the time allotted. So first of all, before I talk about anything, I do want to give one small caveat. This is a picture that I often show when I'm giving these sorts of presentations or talks. This is the amount we're covering, that I'll be covering in today's session. This is the amount still left to learn. And actually, if I'm being honest, that top portion of the iceberg should probably be about half that size, and the bottom portion should be probably about, twice the size. There is a ton of stuff to cover when we're looking at how to be successful in college. So unfortunately, this is not everything, but I think this is a really good start. So I hope that you find this helpful. So when we're talking about being successful in college, one question that I often ask students, and I love being able to talk to students earlier and earlier in their high school careers. I meet with students all the time in, like April or May, even of their high school career, or even July or August, right before they're going off to college. But I love to meet with students even earlier. So I often ask them, when is the best time to start to begin to develop your important skills that you're going to need to be successful in college? And the answer, of course, is now, right? So not July or August, right before you're going off to college, maybe not even March or April or May of your senior year. Right now, it's never too early to start. My daughter is in 6th grade, and I even talk to her about getting ready for college, because these are skills that you're building on over time. And so now is a great time to be thinking about, how can I start getting ready for college now? And so I think hopefully you'll be thinking about that as I'm talking today, and be thinking about how you can implement this into where you are in your current educational journey. So, of course, you're looking for some keys to success, right? That's what I promised. So I'm going to cover 5 keys for success today. But first, I want to talk about 3 foundational behaviors. And some of these are going to seem really obvious, but you might be surprised at how sometimes students kind of struggle with them. So these 3 basic or foundational behaviors that we know that students who report Participating or engaging in these three behaviors regularly do really well in college or do better in college. So these three behaviors: going to class, even when it's cold and snowy, doing all of the assigned readings, and taking good notes. So those are three of the first keys that I'm going to cover. And then I'm going to touch on time management. I will warn you, time management is definitely something that I could spend hours talking about. So that is definitely a topic that I'm going to cover, but there is a lot more of that under the iceberg that's definitely needing to be looked at. The other thing I'm going to talk about today is asking for help and why that's so important and what that could look like. So let's get started. Why should you go to class? I tell students all the time, going to college is synonymous with going to class. Like when you say, I want to go to college, whether it's a 2-year or 4-year, a technical school, you are saying, I want to go to class, right? And so it's really good to get in that habit now of being in class on a regular basis. So why should you go? Well, first of all, and this is not going to surprise anyone, I don't think, statistically, students who attend class regularly are more academically successful. And again, I don't think that's shocking to anyone, but also to learn. You can do readings, you can, look over notes and things, but really being in class is where you're going to be learning the information that you need. Also, instructors are going to assume that you've done your readings when you show up to class, and we're going to talk about those readings in a little bit. The other important piece, though, about going to class regularly, aside from learning from your instructor, is to learn from your peers. A lot of classes, maybe not large lectures, but smaller classes, you're going to have a ton of maybe discussions, hearing from those around you, hearing from your peers. And really, that's where a lot of that rich learning happens, is hearing other people's perspectives or points of view, other people's questions. I know that when I was in school, I really learned a lot from my peers. And I know sometimes I would even panic because I remember thinking, especially in one of my grad classes, I was sitting there and everyone was they had so much, brilliant information to share. And they would say things like, I remember on page 100 of this reading, I read blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I don't remember reading that at all. And if I hadn't been in class hearing that, I would not have, I would have missed that. So learning from your instructor, but also learning from your peers, very important. Another piece that a lot of students are not aware of, if you're not attending class regularly, especially in those first couple weeks of class, if you just don't go, or you feel like, I don't need to show up, that can actually adversely affect your financial aid. And that's kind of a long story about why that can happen, but just know that not going to class, that will show up, that will eventually can eventually come back to haunt you. So like at the University of Iowa, our instructors are required, and this is a requirement of a lot of institutions, to report if their students have not come to class those first couple weeks. And that information is then given to our financial aid office. So students who haven't come, our financial aid office will reach out to. So obviously that is not the main reason for why you should go to class. Going to class is about learning and being there, being present. But that is something that a lot of students are shocked to hear. When you are in class, you need to be an engaged learner, right? I remember when I was younger, I went to church, and one of the things my parents used to say was, just sitting in church is not going to make you a Christian, just like being a chicken in a hen house is not going to make you a chicken. Like, you have to be actively engaged, was what they were saying. Same thing with going to class. You have to be an active learner. You can't learn by osmosis. My math teacher used to tell me that all the time, and I got so irritated, but she was right. You can't learn if you're just sitting there. You have to be an engaged learner. So what does that mean? That means you're paying attention. It means you're taking notes. It means maybe you're asking questions, participating in responding to questions from the instructor, participating in small group discussions, actually being present. This slide I show students because it is just ridiculous. So This instructor or this teaching assistant at Michigan, University of Michigan, a couple years ago, was a TA in a large lecture class, like 700 or 800 students, and her fellow TAs used to keep track of all the things that they saw students doing on their laptops during class. And at the end of class, she put them on a list and threw them up on a PowerPoint so that the whole class could see, basically, like, holding that mirror in front of faces and telling them, this is what we saw you doing. There's a lot of stuff on here that you shouldn't be doing in class, right? Like, there's no way these students are paying attention, obviously. And also, like, this is really distracting to the students around them. So when I tell students, like, go to class, I mean, be engaged, be present. And this is just a small list of the things that you should not be doing while you are in class. And I always, this list just makes me laugh because I think a lot of students had no idea that anyone was watching them, but they were. So, all right. So step one, go to class. What's next, right? Well, doing the readings. I want you to kind of think here, ask yourself. Usually if I'm in person, I'll ask students to answer this, but I want you to ask yourself, what do you think? On average, how many pages is a typical reading assignment in college? So thinking about when you're assigned readings in high school, what's a typical, how many pages are you typically assigned? Are you assigned a book? What do you think it is in college? What do you think a typical reading assignment is going to be? So thinking, got your number. Here's the answer. A typical reading assignment in college is between 20 to 50 pages of a textbook. Sometimes instructors will even assign like an entire nonfiction book per week or per 2 weeks. That's per class period, 50 pages, 20 to 50 pages of a textbook per class period. So if you have class 3 times a week, you could be looking at, almost 150 pages of a textbook that you need to be reading every week. And that can kind of make some students kind of panic. And this is the thing is, you do need to be doing these readings because, like I pointed out earlier, instructors will have assumed that you've done these readings. Some instructors will even test you over things that they assigned you to read about, but didn't talk about in class. Anything that they assigned is fair game, right? So a lot of times they might not have enough time to cover everything in class, but they are assuming that when you show up to class, you have done those readings. So this is a lot, right? This can be kind of overwhelming. So how do you make this happen, right? Well, first of all, practice now. But there's also some basics that you can keep in mind. And the first thing is, please have regular access to your textbooks. Most of this is going to be buying your textbooks, right? Buying textbooks can be kind of expensive though. So some textbooks are also available online. There are some institutions that are moving to having a books available to students online. Some instructors will have a copy of their textbook on reserve at the library, your school library. So you can also try to check that out, every once in a while, and go or sit in the library and read then. Sometimes if you don't have access or you don't have the money to buy the textbook, you can ask the instructor if they have an extra copy that you could borrow. But it is really important that you actually do legit have you have access to your textbooks, because those readings are so important and they're part of the learning process. So step one, make sure you have your textbooks. And just as an FYI really quick too, if you are enrolled in science or math classes, you're looking at those textbooks are going to run a little more expensive than some of the others, especially if you have like a textbook and like a lab manual. I mean, you're looking at maybe, depending on what institution you're at and what class you're taking, between $300 to $500, maybe even $600 or $700 just for that one class. So be looking out for trying to get used textbooks or maybe even picking them up on different websites. but do make sure you can access those and are able to have those. The next thing is considering the location, the surrounding, and the time of day. So a lot of students have found that if they're living on campus, reading in their dorm room is actually not the best place to read, because believe it or not, those can actually be kind of loud and busy, and there's people coming and going. So think about where is the best place for you to read. A lot of students really enjoy reading in the library because it's quiet. Sometimes students find, a special study space available that they can read. But if you are trying to read and you're finding that the location you're in is just not helpful, consider finding a different place. Also be thinking about your surroundings and the fact that, like, are you in a location that is loud? Are you in a place that you are easily distracted? Do you need to put your phone away? Do you need to be away from friends? So really thinking about that location and the surrounding is really important for when you're trying to read. And then time of day. So interestingly enough, if you try to do your studying at about the same time every day, you kind of start training your brain to be ready to study. So your brain is thinking, oh, it's 10 a.m., it's time to study. So it gets into like study mode, and you'll find that it's a little easier after a while to concentrate. So really thinking about the time of day. The other thing is when you're thinking about time of day, if you're not a morning person, maybe don't get up at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. and read your textbook. If you are, or if maybe the afternoon time, that time between about 1 to 3 o'clock can be kind of heavy. So maybe don't try reading your textbooks during that time of day if you find yourself being tired. So really thinking about when is the best time for me? When can I concentrate the most? Another thing that I always warn students, and sometimes you can't read when it's like completely deadly quiet, right? Like sometimes you have to have some kind of noise of some kind, whether it's a fan or noise machine, music. If you're going to listen to music while you're reading, I will caution you of this though. If you're going to listen to music, the best kind of music to listen to is classical music. There's lots of reasons for that, but one of those is if you're listening to music with words, your brain is taking in words through your ears, and then it's also going to try to take in words through your eyes. That's a lot of like taking in words through different areas of your brain, and your brain is going to like freak out, right? So listening to music with words while you're trying to read is not necessarily conducive to reading. If you're listening to classical music, that at least can provide some of that, background noise, but it helps your brain to incorporate what you're reading better. Another thing that you absolutely need to do is just commit to doing the readings. It's like one of those things, sometimes you just don't want to do it, but you need to do it anyway. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to the time management portion, but just do this now. Just promise yourself, I'm going to do the readings, or I'm going to at least do my best, right? And when you are reading, use active reading skills. How many times do you finish reading and are like, I have no idea what I just read, but I finished it and I'm done checking it off my list and I'm on my way. You have to back up. If you finish reading and are like, I don't know what I just read, then you need to reread it. You can't check it off your list and be on your merry way. So use active reading skills. What are active reading skills? Well, I want to show these two really quick, I promise they're fast, short videos that kind of explain what I mean when I'm talking about active reading. The first video I'm going to show doesn't have any words, so if you can't hear any words, you're not missing any words, but please do pay attention. So this is how do you practice active reading skills? I'm sorry. Okay, so that kind of talked about some of the different aspects of active reading skills. And I think one of the most helpful things in there is the idea of first kind of skimming over first to see what you're going to read, but looking at those main headings in the chapter and turning that into a question. So for example, if this is really simplifying things, but let's say the heading is elements of chemistry. So you change that to what are elements of chemistry? And then you read that section. If you can't answer that question after reading that section, then you know you need to go back and reread that. One thing I want you to keep in mind, I want to remind you at the beginning, remember I talked about how these are things that you need to be working on now. And a lot of times I hear from students like, oh, I don't have to do the readings. Like whatever, I understand it. I don't really do the readings in high school. It's fine, whatever. This is the time to be developing these skills, right? This is the time, if there's something, if you're in a class and you're like, no, I understand it. I don't feel like I need to do the readings. I don't feel like I need to do this active reading thing that you are talking about. This is the time to be practicing that, right? Like when you feel comfortable with the material and you don't feel rushed and you feel, good about your study skills, this is when you should be developing your study skills, not when you're in the middle of, an incredibly difficult calculus class in college, you know what you're doing. Now is when you should be practicing this. So this is why we're talking about it again, right? I just wanted to remind us and bring us back to that. And I have one more quick thing I want to show you about how do you master these active reading skills. So kind of going over a little bit again about what the last video covered.
This video explains some strategies for active reading. Active reading involves actively engaging with the material. It helps you understand and remember your material better than you would by just reading through it. Try the following tips to read more actively. Highlight. As you read, highlight important information so that you can find it again later. Don't highlight too much. You want the important points to stand out. Write in the margins. Annotate your text with comments, questions, examples, and more. Read out loud. Rather than reading silently in your head, read your material out loud, either to someone else or to an invisible audience. Explain what you've read to someone else. Relaying information to other people helps you understand it better. It can also help you notice information that you haven't quite grasped. Test yourself. After you've read a chapter, try to write down the key points without checking the text.
Okay.
Use these techniques when reading your textbooks.
All right, so those are all some really good points too. After you do a reading, trying to teach that either to yourself in the mirror or a sibling or your dog or cat, trying to teach a concept that you have learned about or read about shows you really fast where those gaps in your knowledge are. So that's a really great way. That's just a really good study habit in general or study skill in general. Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about note taking. So remember, this is the third thing that you need to be developing right now is your note taking skills. And I don't mean just note taking, I mean good note taking skills. So before I talk about this, I want to go over two really quick things. Taking notes by hand versus typing them. A lot of students in college like to take their notes by laptop, which is fine, except we do know, research shows that writing your notes out by hand actually helps you learn the information more. And part of that is the muscle memory of writing it. So like what a lot of students might do is write their notes out by hand and then type them later as part of the review of their notes. So yes, I see students doing that, typing their notes, but technically writing them by hand is a better option. The other thing I encourage you to do is practice learning how to take notes. One thing that I often will suggest to students, if you're not necessarily comfortable with your note-taking skills, or maybe you're going to be taking a class in a subject that you have no familiarity with, you're kind of nervous about it, there's a ton of videos on YouTube. Instructors from all areas post their lectures on YouTube for anyone to go out and watch. So I know this sounds kind of nerdy, but it is a fantastic way to practice taking notes. Go out and watch lectures and practice taking notes. Practice figuring out like, what are some of the key concepts I should be looking for, all of those things. So I think, plus then you have the ability to maybe pause and rewind, but practice learning, practice taking notes so that you are gaining some confidence. So those are two big tips that I have when it comes to taking notes. The other thing, these are some other tips. So key concepts and main points. So these are things that you're going to be needing to look for when you're taking notes. Make sure you're including those key concepts. Important examples. If an instructor goes over an example, make sure you're including that in your notes. Definitions, new vocabulary especially. A lot of times if there's a new term that you're learning about, I would star it or put in the margins of my notes. I would write key concepts or new word and circle it so I could see it. So make sure you're writing those definitions and new vocabulary, especially if it's vocabulary that you read about in your textbook before the class, right? You did your readings. And you weren't quite sure what it meant, but the instructor covers it in class. Write down how they're explaining it so that you now have that information. References provided. A lot of time instructors will say, here's another, here's something else where you can look for information. Here's a video you can watch or a book that you could read. Write those down. You never know when you're going to need that. Anything that was difficult to understand or unfamiliar, make sure you're including that. Any thoughts, questions, general ideas? A lot of times when taking notes, it's helpful to, if you're, right in the middle of something, you're like, oh, wait, I missed, what were they talking about? I don't know what they were saying. Instead of panicking and thinking, getting stuck on that and hearing everything, missing everything else that they're talking about next, write in the margin, write a note. And I often would write something like, fix these notes here, or go back and ask the instructor about this. So writing reminders to yourself. These are all really important things to be writing in your notes. And I remember one of the best pieces of advice I got once when it comes to note taking. And at the time I thought it was ridiculous, but I followed and I'm glad I did. And a student told me once to write like the teacher, write like how they talk, right? So, and I was like, okay. And I had an instructor who was in college who had a very distinct way that he worded things. And so I wrote it like that. That's how I wrote in my notes. I wrote the way the way he structured sentences. I wrote that in my notes. Turns out he also writes his tests the same way he talks. And we had one assignment in that entire class. This is college, so it's different. One assignment, and it was a take-home test. One assignment for the whole class. And lo and behold, my notes matched I could use my notes. My notes matched the test. And so it was so much easier to go back and find the answers to the questions. And I did fine on the test then, which was good. But I was so thankful that someone had told me, write the way they talk, because it actually showed up in the test. It matched. So novel idea, right? And then there is a note-taking timeline that we encourage you to do. So before the class, before the lecture, make sure you're doing those assigned readings so you're prepared and ready to take notes. A lot of times, some instructors before class will post lecture notes or lecture outlines, or maybe their PowerPoint slides. They'll post those on your class webpage or your learning management system webpage, like Blackboard. Go out and print those off. Make sure you have access to those so you have them when you go to class. A lot of times that's where you can write your notes. During the lecture, I always encourage students to sit in the front or in the T zone of the class. So like if this is the front of the class, sit in that front row, or right down the middle. That's the students who sit in that T zone tend to, it's a little bit easier to pay attention. Sitting up closer helps as well. And then also during the lecture, make sure you're listening for those key points, repeated phrases. So if you hear the instructor saying the same phrase over and over, that's a pretty good indication that that is something you definitely need to know. After class, and this is, I think, where a lot of students get tripped up, reviewing your notes regularly. So a lot of times I will ask students, so how often do you review your notes? And they'll be like, I don't know, before a test, I guess. And then we have a long conversation about when they should actually be reviewing them. We actually suggest that you review your notes every day. I'll give you a moment to catch your breath because I know that can be kind of jarring, but we suggest, and I'm not saying like go in and do a deep dive of your notes every single day. No, I want you to go in and read through your notes every day, just kind of read over them. And then a couple times a week, then go back and really study your notes. But what happens is, first of all, you start learning those areas that you're like very familiar with. I feel comfortable with this information. I understand it. You also find the areas that you're not as comfortable with, maybe you have questions about. So you're finding those, spots a few weeks or a week or so before your exam and not the day before. You also are going to learn how to take better notes if you're reviewing them more regularly. And that way, then when you do go to study for that exam, you're not trying to cram all that information into your brain. You already have been studying, right? You've been reviewing your notes. So make sure you're reviewing your notes regularly. Fill in any missing information that you have. A lot of students, that's when they go back and retype their notes or rewrite them. And then you're also try to come up with some kind of like code or note-taking, like shorthand for your faster note-taking for classes. So in my classes, a lot of times, especially when I was taking my graduate classes, the word higher education came up a lot. Well, that takes forever to write out. So my shorthand was, I just always wrote HE and I knew what that meant. Or behavior was always BX. So kind of trying to come up with this shorthand so that it's something that makes sense to you, but also helps you get through it fast, like stay because some instructors talk really fast. So trying to develop a shorthand will definitely be helpful. And if you are practicing, like I mentioned before, watching those lectures on YouTube and practicing taking notes, that's a great time to also be developing that shorthand. Really quick, one method that a lot of students like to use is called the Cornell method. And this is, notice how it's paper, right? It's handwritten, not typed. But you just divide a piece of paper into 3 sections. So that white section here is where your notes are. That's where the meat of it is, your raw notes from your lecture. So it's shorthand, symbols, abbreviations, lists. That's a lot of times where you might put, if they've talked about a different, drawing that you need to include. And then in the left-hand side, that's where you're putting your what we call cues, the things that where you're trying to make sense of your notes or connecting main ideas or concepts or vocabulary. You're writing notes to yourself like key point or vocabulary word here. That's kind of where those additional thoughts are. And then at the bottom, you leave room for a summary. So this is when you go back to review your notes, this is where you're going to have space to maybe revisit some of that information that you covered. So here's an example of what this could potentially look like. This is some notes that were taken Guatemala. So you notice in that right-hand side, those are their main notes, the meat of their notes. They talk about it's in Central America. You know, it has borders with Mexico and Belize and Honduras and El Salvador. That's where all the notes are. And then you'll notice on the right or on the left-hand side, those are kind of those ideas. They're kind of summarizing that, you know, the 4 neighboring countries. It has 3 regions, and and then it goes into more detail about what those regions look like. And then at the very bottom, that's where the person kind of summarized information or put it together, made sure you understood it. So this is kind of what that Cornell method could look like if you're, in practice, you're using that. Okay, so we've talked about going to class. We've talked about taking good notes. We've talked about doing the assigned readings. Time management. So I will tell you this, when we ask new first-year students at the University of Iowa, what are they most excited about? The top answer we get is, I am so excited to have freedom to, be my own boss. And I'm really excited to decide what I want to do, when I want to do it, and just really, make sense of my schedule. And I'm just so excited to be on my own and learn about who I am. And then we'll ask them, well, what's something that you are most, maybe have some, a little bit of hesitancy about? And the top answer, oh my goodness, I'm going to be on my own. I'm going to have to make all my own decisions. I'm going to have to be in charge of my schedule. It's kind of that too, yeah. So time management is so important. And honestly, this could be an entire workshop in and of itself, is time management. But let's talk a little bit about what I mean when I'm talking about time management. So first of all, what is time management? And I think this definition is taken from Wikipedia, which I always tell students, don't use Wikipedia, but this is a really good definition. So time management is the act or process, notice I highlighted process, of planning. So it's not just a one-step thing, it's planning and exercising conscious control over the amount of time spent on specific activities, especially to increase effectiveness, efficiency, or productivity. Okay, what does that mean? So basically that means that time management is purposeful, it's planned, and it's an effective use of time. Avoids procrastination and inefficient multitasking. I always tell students, multitasking is not a thing, or at least good multitasking is not a thing. It helps you avoid procrastination, and it ultimately determines how successful you will be. And I will tell you this, the more you can work on managing your time now, the more your future self will thank you. Your future self will look back and be like, oh, wow, thanks past self for working on this. Time management is so important. And I found a lot of students find that the more free time they have, the less productive they are. I always encourage students, if they are able to take an 8 o'clock class, and they usually groan when I say that, but part of the reason I say that is because it forces you to get up out of bed, it forces you to start your day, it forces you not to waste quite as much time. I think the worst thing I ever did in college, and this was, I don't know why anybody let me do this, but I had a semester once where my first class of the day was never before 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Never. I never had class before 4. That was quite possibly the worst semester I've ever had, because I just had too much time. I didn't accomplish anything, right? Because who goes to bed before 2 or 3 in the morning if you don't have to get up until 3 in the afternoon, right? And so I never accomplished anything. So try to schedule classes during the day, early in the morning. But getting ahead of myself a little bit when I'm talking about tips. But what I'm saying is this, learn time management skills now, work on this now. And it's so important that you do that, because this is one of the most important things you'll need when you get to college. So what are some tips for managing your time? First of all, you have to stay committed to staying on schedule, which everybody messes up. It's going to happen. And when that happens, you're like, okay, guess I'm going to do better tomorrow. But one thing that you do need to keep in mind, if you are going to college and you're going to take at least 12 credit hours, 12 to 15 is usually about the typical. We tell students all the time, you need to plan for every 1 credit hour. You need to plan about 2 to 3 hours of study time per week. And that usually makes people panic because they do the math and they realize they need to plan on about 40 hours of study time and they don't even know what they would do with that much time. And that's when I tell them that's when you're reviewing your notes, you're doing your readings. I met with a student one time who I asked them, how much do you study? And they were like, I don't know, 5 hours. And I was like, a day? That's magnificent. Good for you. And they're like, no, like a week. And I almost like panicked for them because 5 hours a week is not sufficient in college. So be committed to trying to manage your time because you do need to plan on studying a lot. Like I tell students, when you want to go to college full time, that's almost equivalent to a full-time job. Like that's what you're signing up for. So you can see why time management is so important. Use a planner or a calendar app. A lot of students will pick up a planner at their institution's bookstore. The nice thing about that is it has like important dates from your institution already embedded in that planner. So you know when your breaks are, maybe you know when finals week is, you know when there's due dates for certain things like having to drop a class. But using a planner or a calendar app is so important. And a lot of times I'll meet with the student who's like, yeah, I own a planner, but like, I don't know where it is. It's somewhere. So when I say buy a planner, I didn't buy a planner. I said use a planner. Very important. Buying it, step 1. Using it, step 2. Make to-do lists. Super important. And a lot of students really, really get a lot more done when they've made a to-do list. But I always encourage students to take the next step. Don't just make a to-do list, schedule everything. And I'm going to show you a little bit what I mean. But sometimes when you have a long list of to-do things you need to work on and projects, and you look at that list and the first thing you do is like feel really overwhelmed. You don't even know where to start. So schedule everything. One thing that I encourage students to do is at the beginning of their semester, when they get a syllabus, go through that syllabus and write down everything in the planner right away. So write down when your exams are, when your major assignments are due. If you have like a weekly discussion board posting that you need to be doing, write all of that in the planner and schedule time to work on it. So schedule time, say you have a paper that you know you're going to need to work on. So maybe schedule 1 hour one day to or a couple hours to do the research, and then the next day you're scheduling time to do the outline of that paper, and then another day you're scheduling time to work on the first 2 pages. So literally scheduling everything. So having a to-do list is great, but then transforming that to-do list into an actual schedule, very helpful. It's also really, really freeing because if I know like, oh man, I have a paper that I need to work on and I'm so stressed out about it. Oh wait, I don't need to stress out. I know that I'm going to start working on it on Wednesday. Today's only Monday. I don't have to stress out. I know that I have scheduled myself time to work on it on Wednesday. And today I'm going to do readings for my class that is due tomorrow. So like scheduling everything, oh, it's so freeing because then you don't have to worry about when you're going to do that. I had a student once who, oh, I just love them. They're the most wonderful person ever, but they had a giant, like half of a wall whiteboard that they wrote on. And it was, as soon as they walked in their dorm room, that's what they saw. And it was a huge to-do list. And immediately, as soon as they saw their to-do list, they immediately, every time they walked into their room, felt overwhelmed and just didn't know what to do with that to-do list. And I was like, well, step 1, get rid of that. Take that down. Don't immediately see a to-do list as soon as you walk into the area that's supposed to be, like a haven, from a safe place from all of that noise. And put that to-do list into a schedule so that you feel more comfortable. So scheduling everything. Okay, a couple more tips. Using color coding system. So my color code system, so if I had, like say I had a math class, my binder for math class was blue. When I was scheduling myself to work on something for math, I wrote it in blue. So everything matched, right? And I'll show you in a little bit what I mean, but color coding is so helpful. Break large projects into smaller tasks because, like I said, it can be incredibly overwhelming if you have a giant project coming up. You don't even know where to start. You don't want to work on it. Break it into a smaller task list. Today, I'm just going to do the opening paragraph for this paper. That's it. I've scheduled myself to do more tomorrow. Make sure you're taking study breaks. There's nothing productive that happens if you are sitting down to study for like 4 hours and never getting up. But one thing I do caution students, don't just take a study break, because I was really good at taking study breaks and then like 12 hours later, I came back to what I was doing, right? Like that's not a very good study break. If you're going to take a study break, set a timer. So I would always set a timer for maybe 15 minutes, or allow yourself to maybe watch one episode of a 20-minute episode of a show on Netflix, or go out and walk around the block or something, but have some kind of like beginning and end to that break so that, you know, you have some structure built into that. Again, limiting distractions, that is really hard. That's easier said than done. A lot of times distractions will come up, and even things you don't even have control over. Technical distractions, maybe sometime you log into your computer and something's wonky with it and it's not working, and suddenly you're not accomplishing as much as you wanted to. But to the extent that you can, try to limit those distractions. And then evaluate how you're using your time and make adjustments. So maybe every Sunday afternoon, you look back at, okay, how did I manage my time last week? And what changes should I make this week? The other thing is, make sure you're scheduling. When I say schedule everything, make sure you're scheduling like personal time to do nothing, time to hang out with your friends. Make sure you're scheduling that as well, or you're including, like if you're going to be working, make sure you include that in your schedule. Literally scheduling everything and evaluating how you're doing and making adjustments, because it's not going to be perfect ever. I'm, an adult, and I've been managing my time for quite a few years, and I still struggle too. So it's a process, but it does get easier. So I did promise that I would show you an example. So this is literally a page right out of my calendar. This is a day in the life of me, but you'll notice how color coordinated it is. Everything that's personal is blue. This Countdown to College was a program that I did this summer, so everything related to that was purple. It's all there. I even schedule a reminder to take my vitamin, because otherwise I will forget. So when I say schedule everything, I literally mean schedule everything. And this is I use an Outlook. I use Outlook calendars for mine. Use what works best for you. But again, this is a great time to be figuring out what works for you, right? While you're still in high school, not the first week of your first semester of college, right? Now is a great time to be figuring out, what do I want a planner? Do I need to use an app? This is a great time to be working on this. Okay. We're almost to the end, I promise. The next thing I want to make sure we talk about is asking for help. This is so important. And one thing that I ask students all the time, or a couple things, I want to think about, when should you be asking for help? So let's think here. I usually ask a student, do you own a car? Does someone in your family own a car? Yes. When you get the oil changed in your car, do you wait to get the oil changed in your car until it is on fire? No. You get your oil changed on a regular basis, right? As routine maintenance. Or another example, going to the dentist. you know, we're supposed to like go to the dentist, you know, twice a year for routine cleanings. Do we wait until our teeth are falling out of our face before we go to the dentist? Not usually, right? We usually follow through on that, going to the dentist, getting them cleaned, making sure there's no cavities. That's routine maintenance, right? So if you don't wait for your car to start on fire or your teeth to fall out of your face before you get help, why would you do that with your academics? Why would you wait to ask for help until you are feeling really overwhelmed, really lost, you don't know what's happening, you're on fire, right? Why would you wait? You don't. So we encourage students to get help you know, like early and often, and before you're really struggling. So even if you maybe aren't struggling, you know, I go to the dentist all the time and everything's fine. I get them cleaned and I'm on my way. So same thing with asking for help. So if you're asking for help, who could you be asking? Who could be helping you? Well, first of all, your instructors. Go to office hours. That's a great time to get to know your instructors. Office hours are times that instructors have set aside specifically to meet with students. If their scheduled office hours don't work with your schedule, then ask them, is there another time I could meet with you? But that's a really great time to ask questions with your instructors. And if you don't have questions about the content, one thing you can ask is, what suggestions do you have on the best way to take notes for your class? Or what can you tell me about like some of the key concepts that I should know? So really, but then also taking your questions to the instructor and saying, I do not understand this concept. Can you please help me work through this? So going to office hours, talking to your instructors. Another important place to get help is counseling and mental health services. Every institution has a counseling and mental health service for their students, and the vast majority of them are free for students. So using those mental health resources is absolutely imperative. And again, that's something that we could talk about for an entire hour, just the need to make sure you're meeting with those counselors. Tutoring services, every institution has tutoring available. Some of them you do have to pay for, some of them are free, but getting a tutor for a class that you might not feel terribly confident in is a great place to ask for help, a great place to start. Your academic advisor, if you have questions about, I'm not sure I like this class. Can I drop this class? If I'm not doing well in a class and I drop it, how will that affect my path to my degree? I'm thinking about changing my major. What could that look like? Those are all great questions to talk to your advisor about. Another place to ask for help is service center staff. So a lot of institutions will have all of their staff in one place. So you can ask, how do I drop a class? How do I pay my bill? I got a scholarship check. What do I do with this? So asking those folks for help, really important. A financial aid office staff. So if financial aid isn't part of the service center at your institution, financial aid staff are fantastic. They can help with, not only answering questions about your financial aid, but they can also help you fill out your FAFSA, which you'll be needing to do every year. They're just a really great resource for helping students if you have questions about maybe how you're going to pay for college. Financial aid office staff are a wonderful resource. Librarians, that is something that I didn't know when I went to college. I didn't know librarians could help me in college. Yes, they're a great resource to ask for help if you have a paper that you're not quite, like a research paper, and you're really not quite sure how to get started. A lot of institutions have, students have access to a ton of databases, and it's really hard to figure out how to search that stuff. Librarians are a fantastic resource. So make sure you're asking your librarians for help as well. And then your residence hall staff. So if you're living on campus, your RA or whatever they are referred to, great person to ask for help. pretty much any question you have. They can either help you or tell you who can. Career center staff. Every institution has some kind of career center or job placement office. They can help you not only figure, a lot of students are like, I don't need them until I'm ready to graduate. False. They can help you get your resume written. They can often help you practice for interviews. They can, a lot of times they will host mock interviews for students. Career center staff is also a great place to talk to if you don't know what to major in. You're really not sure. You're not sure what is a good fit for you, and you have a lot of questions, or you're thinking about changing your major, but you don't know what kind of jobs you could get. The Career Center and job placement offices are great places to ask. And then, of course, family members and friends. They're also a great place to ask for help. They're a wonderful support resource for students. And sometimes, especially if you're a first-generation college student, maybe your family can't answer questions about how to pay your bill, or how to help you replace your student ID if you've lost it, but they can be there to support you, and they can be there to just listen. And so family and friends are also a really great resource. Okay, just a few last things, and then I know we have got some final thoughts that I need to leave some time for Keely. So I'm going to go through these real fast. A few final thoughts. Set a sleep schedule. Set your schedule now. Get in the habit of waking up at the same time, going to bed at the same time. These are things that you need to be doing, working on while you're still in high school. Getting a job when you're in college is actually a really, really great thing to do, especially if it's on campus. There's another session this week about working on campus, and I highly encourage you to attend that session. I think you will find it very informative and helpful. Creating a communication plan when you go to college. So setting up a time maybe with your parents or a significant other that's like, here's the thing, I will text you at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I will text you at 8 p.m. And that's the only time I'm going to text you. So if you text me and I don't respond, it's not that I'm dead, or it's not that I hate you. I'm in class and I can't respond. Or on Sunday afternoon, I'm going to call my parents, and they're going to put the dog on the camera because I need to see my dog. That's part of a communication plan. So also things to keep in mind. If homesickness is something that every student is going to encounter, even if you're living at home while going to college, totally normal. If it becomes something that is making it difficult for you to be successful, make sure you are talking to someone in your counseling service office. Value difficult assignments, challenging concepts in hard classes, and value gen eds. There's nothing worse than saying, I'm gonna get my gen eds out of the way. No, gen eds, that's where you learn about all these really cool things that you wouldn't have learned about otherwise, and expands your ability, you get to really, learn about things that maybe you've never heard of before. But those aside, I tell my students this all the time. If college is easy, you're doing it wrong. It's supposed to be challenging. It's supposed to stretch you. So I know when you're in the middle of it and you're like, I do not value this. I do not value this challenge. It is a valuable time for you. You're learning new information, but you're also learning how to study, and you're learning how to work through difficult things. So find value in that, or know that there is value. Setting realistic academic goals, again, an entire thing that I could talk about, but make sure you're setting goals and that they are realistic. And then be proactive again about seeking help. So make sure you're asking for help early and often. And lastly, monitor and take action again on your mental health needs. So make sure that you are utilizing those campus counseling services. So really quick, in summary, some of the keys that we talked about today: going to class regularly and being engaged while you're there, doing the readings before class, taking good notes, managing your time well, and asking for help are all some of the keys to being successful in college. If you have any questions or would like more information about something, my email address is here. It's just angela-lam@uiowa.edu. You are welcome to email me and say, hey, I caught this session, I have some questions. Absolutely, that is what I'm here for. I'm here to serve the students in the state of Iowa. So if you have questions, I don't care if you're going to come to Iowa or not, I will still answer your question because that is what I'm here for. So I hope you learned something today. I will turn it over back over to Keely and let her take it from there.
All right, thank you. Yes, such great information. Like as you're reading through it, I'm like, oh yes, I remember doing this, or I still do so many of those things in my professional adult life as well. So really great information. If anyone has any final questions, please feel free to ask them now or type them into the chat, and we'll definitely check the chat before we close out today. As a reminder, though, we have Back on Track sessions for the rest of this week. They're happening all week. Please check out the link that we'll put back into the chat as well to find sessions that might interest everyone. And we will also want to thank all of the partners that have graciously donated their time to help us get this event off. And so you could see them also at the iowacollegeaid.gov/backontrack. Let's see here. This recording will be available in about a week. And so if you are, oh, there they are, our Back on Track partners. Yes, thank you to all of those. The recording will be available with your school counselor in about a week. And so if you have any, if you would like to get access to that, please reach out to them or reach out to Jamie. And then also this Sunday, as a reminder, there's a Golden Fair College and Career Fair, Golden Circle College and Career Fair. It is happening from 1 to 3 in Altoona. So if you're interested in learning more about that, the link is in the chat. It's a great way to connect with different schools and learn about the programs and be able to ask someone a question face to face. Angie, thank you again for your time today, and we will have your email for anyone who may have questions later on. I guess that wraps it up for today, unless we have other questions. I don't think there were any in chat. All right, thank you so much.